Hey, Nathan here. Welcome back to a new series that will cover flat paddles. And flat paddles is a game implementation that we're going to use, and we're going to use the PGL2D library. That's the alpha build. And flat paddles is just a pawn clone, a simple pawn clone. All it's going to do is it's going to have a player control paddle on the left, enemy control paddle on the right, and a ball that randomly chooses a direction when it serves. And at the top left, it's going to have your score, the player's score. At the top right, it's going to have the enemy's score. And on the top middle, it's going to have the time that you have been playing. And it's going to use the PGL2D's input map to move up and move down, and that's the only input that's going to be allowed. So this is going to be a very quick game, and a very quick series. So this is the introduction to the series, and the first thing I like to do is to just discuss how the series will be laid out. We'll be grouping a bunch of content together in folders, and we will be separating a lot of the code to interfaces and enums and very short files. And one thing that I received comments about on the previous series, which is the PGL2D Alpha series, is that I released a video for that series. My plan was, at the start, was to have a tutorial per file. And for those of you that have been programming for a while and use the single responsibility principle and like to break apart as much of your code as possible to separate things, you know that sometimes interfaces or files can be extremely short sometimes. Especially interfaces that might only have 1 to 5 properties. In that case, some of those videos that are released were 3 minutes or even down to 1 minute. And I've changed my workflow a little bit for this series, and I will mention that in a separate video. So just keep in mind that some of the files we make here are going to be extremely short. Okay, the structure, we're going to have a folder for our entities, and that's going to have our ball, our enemy paddle, our player paddle, our interfaces for the paddle to determine both player and enemy paddles will be using that interface, and we'll have a paddle control that will be an enum that will let us know in code if it's a player-controlled paddle or a computer-controlled paddle. And then we will have a participant, which will be the paddle. You are the participant for the player paddle. The computer is the participant for the computer's paddle. So the participant is kind of the person controlling, the entity that's controlling it. You are the participant for your paddle. The computer is the participant for their paddle. And then we will have a folder for our game screen. It's just going to have one screen in this series and no other screens. We're also going to have content. We're going to have a texture, a PNG file for our ball, and we're going to have a PNG file for our paddle. We will also have a sprite font file, and I'm using a Open Sans font for this. It's a font that you can get from Google Fonts, and it's open source. You just have to provide a license text file when you use it. It's using let me open that up. It's using the Apache license, so you just have to provide that, and any kind of changes you make to that you need to add the reference to that. So I'm using Open Sans for my game font. So that's pretty much the whole series in a overview of what's going to be contained. We're going to have a few classes to handle our ball, of what we're hitting, our paddles, our participant, the game screen, and what our content is. So the way we are going to structure the series is we are structuring it in 3 different parts. The first part, we are going to create our project and our solution. We're going to create all of our folders that we need. We're going to add the PGL2D library to that project. And we're going to target a different .NET framework because the PGL2D library does that. So we need to target the same or above our references. And once we get all that done, we're going to discuss 2 of the short files. That way we no longer need to have a 1-minute tutorial coming up in the next video or a couple videos. So this is going to be the shortest video. Tutorial 1 is, it's going to be the shortest video. It's going to actually create the project and discuss 2 of the short files. And then it will go on to tutorial 2, which I think it's that one is the longest. We'll find out in a few minutes. And that will discuss everything we need to get the paddle set up and handle the ball movement and collision and vector reflection and all that stuff. So we need to have a participant class as well, and that is discussed in tutorial 2. A participant means whoever is controlling that paddle. If you're playing the paddles game, you are the participant, and the computer is the participant of the enemy paddle. When you play a pong game, you get the points. The paddle does not get the points. The paddle is just an instrument. You get the points. You're the one controlling it. You get the points. So we need a participant to have a way to award points to, and to say you are controlling this paddle. And then we have 2 different paddle classes, one for the player paddle and one for the enemy paddle. And the player paddle is going to have separate logic because you will be responding to keyboard input, the up and down arrow keys. That is for the player paddle class. The enemy paddle is going to have a different logic. It's going to have very basic, very, very basic artificial intelligence. It's going to reference the ball, and it's going to match its Y position with some tolerance value. And then we need the ball class, and that's going to have some logic in there as well. That is going to be responsible for collision and doing vector reflection. And then we're going to have a serve method in the ball where it's going to reset everything to the initial values and serve it in a random angle. So that will be the second tutorial. The third tutorial is going to cover the game screen. That's pretty much where we bring everything we created in the first 2 tutorials into one giant screen class. We'll add our entities to the PGL2D system, and we will work on our logic, our game logic. That will be where we serve our ball, and that will be where we actually award points. That is where the logic is going to be. Once we do the game screen, we just have a couple things left to do after that. We need to modify the game1.cs file. We will rename that to a standard naming convention I use, and then we will pretty much delete everything in there and just create a new game screen implementation, a new object of game screen, and add that to our screen system, and that's pretty much it for that file. Now, since we're using PGL2D, we need to modify the program.cs. That's usually automatically generated, and you don't modify that. But we do need to modify that because we're using PGL2D. We need to provide the int width and the int height of our game window, the dimensions of that, the background color we want for the game, and where our content root directory is. So that's finishing up. Then we need to add our content to our project. The PNG files for our ball and our paddle, and the sprite font object as well. and then we'll actually run the game, test it, see if everything's working right, and then I'll offer my final thoughts. So that will be the third tutorial. So it's only going to be 3 tutorials. This is tutorial 0, just for numbering purposes. This is an introduction. And there will be a 4th tutorial just for numbering purposes, and that will be looking back. My thoughts on the series in terms of a programmer's perspective and a content producer perspective. So that is the structure, tutorial numbering structure for this series. The first tutorial, let's look at the projects here. The first tutorial is 9 minutes 56 seconds. Around 10 minutes is now my minimum time. 9 minutes 56 seconds, that's close enough to 10, so I allowed that. But less than 10 minutes, if it's a 7-minute video, if it's a 5-minute video, I'll add that to another part of the video. So tutorial 1 is the shortest one. Tutorial 2 is they all get longer. So tutorial 2 is now 38 minutes, and tutorial 3 is 41 minutes. And then tutorial 0, I don't know how long this is going to be, because I cut part of my commenting up. So right now it's set to 6 minutes. It might be longer. It might be less than 10 minutes. But I'll allow this one less than 10 minutes. And then tutorial 4, I didn't do that yet. I do that at the very end of the series when everything's all out there and people have commented and stuff like that. So I don't know what I'm going to discuss in tutorial 4 yet. And then the last thing I do, when I release my looking back, I also release the full series video. And that includes everything. I built this series into one giant video. It was in multiple recording sessions, but I made the assumption that it would be one giant video that I would cut up. And that's exactly what I did. So this is actually made for one video. In the previous series, which was the PGL 2D series, I did that after the fact. And I did that quickly because it was about a 5-hour series. 4.5, 5 hour, I think. It was somewhere in between there. And I just added tutorial 1 plus tutorial 2 plus tutorial 3. So you hear me say, welcome to a brand new tutorial like 27 times in that video. In this video, you don't hear that. That is why I've created clips, intros, and outros. I have created introduction clips, and I've created outro clips. So that is the whole structure of the series. Okay, so stay tuned for tutorial 1. I hope you enjoyed this series. It's a relatively short one. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the other side.